2 decades later, the PlayStation 2 still remains as one of the most beloved consoles by gamers worldwide, and it's not hard to see why. Not only did the console appeal to gamers by having such a massive and memorable catalog, but also to the general public by offering the cheapest DVD player on the market. And not to mention the fact that Sony knew how to play its cards and capitalize on the weaknesses and shortcomings of the competition, which, in case you've been living under a rock, consisted of Nintendo with its GameCube and to some extent even the Nintendo 64, Sega with their Dreamcast, which sadly was their last console, and the newbie Microsoft with their Xbox. With all of this, the PlayStation 2 clearly earned its title as the best-selling console of all time. And here in this video, I will share with you my experience with this console after many years of use. And now that we're covering the console, let's open it up and mod the console to see what it can do. Well, here it is. I present to you my dear PlayStation 2. And I know it's not in the best shape, but despite all the hits and blows on my part, it still works like it did on day one. This was a gift from my dad who gave it to me many years ago. At that time, I only had this thing that worked with NES cartridges. It wasn't the most legal thing to own, but I had a lot of fun with it. Anyway, one day out of curiosity, I connected a foreign power adapter to it and I fried the poor thing. And after having other pirate versions of the NES, which at that time I wasn't even aware that they were knockoff consoles, one day my dad came home and took out this huge box from his suitcase and asked me to see the content. I had no idea what to expect until I made my way to this other box, which to my surprise was the PlayStation 2. I was so excited to have the console in my hands, and after coming from that cheap clone of the NES, this thing really did seem as if it came from a very distant future. Everything about it, the box, the manuals, the console, heck, even the cables, felt incredibly futuristic. But what really blew away my young and impressionable mind was the DualShock controller. I hadn't seen anything like it before. The design and build quality were so good, it almost looked like the control panel of a spaceship. Even now this controller is still impressive, and has aged pretty well, maybe except for the cables, but yeah. Unfortunately, the console didn't come with any games, and after saving up money for a while, I finally got my hands on my first game, which in fact I still have it with me, and is the Taka Race Driver 3. You can tell by the printing it's not an original copy. The box is a little worn out after so many years exposed to the elements, but thankfully it still works. When I inserted the game into the console and started playing, my jaw dropped. It almost looked like real life. I wasn't expecting the game to look the way it did, since I literally thought that the PS2 played the same games as my older consoles, but instead of cartridges, discs. Yeah, I thought that was the only difference. After skipping through several console generations in an instant, you can imagine that I was amazed to the point that I found myself questioning if it was all just a dream. Fortunately, this wasn't a dream, and after experimenting with the PS2 for a while, the truth is that being the spoiled little brat that I was, I didn't take very good care of the console. Sometimes I would rage at some game and pull on the cables and drop the poor thing on the floor. And probably you can relate to this one, someone tripping over the cables and taking the console with them. And that happened to me several times and it was so frustrating. Luckily the PS2 was built like a tank and survived years of abuse. Something I should mention is that the newer controllers that I have started having issues when pressing the start button. And this seems to be a common problem with the H series. So if you're gonna get a new controller, make sure it's not from this series. My PS2 already came with the Matrix chip installed, so I didn't have to spend millions on games. And I know that some people would tell me that I'm a thief and all of that, but that was the reality for me and many other people who didn't have a choice. The lens still works pretty well. There are days it works better than others, but at the end, it does read games. And here, some of you probably already noticed that it's missing the rubber thingy that covers the spindle that spins the discs. And the story behind that is that me, as the big idiot that I am, I took it up thinking that this way, it would somehow help it read the discs better. I don't know what I was thinking, but luckily for me, I didn't completely screw up the console. But it did introduce an issue. Since the discs are slightly lower, when I put more pressure than I should on the lid, the discs touch the surface of the disc tray, which makes it more likely for the ribbon cable to scratch my discs. This is a well-known bad design choice on Sony's part, but with all of this I just made it a bit worse. When I turn on the console, it makes this weird noise. I don't know why this is, but this sound was there when I turned on my PS2 for the first time. I thought this was completely normal until I heard another PS2 and noticed that it was pretty much silent compared to mine. At least it's something I'm not responsible for. One fun fact about my PS2 is that the console only comes with 2 languages by default, traditional Chinese and English. Since my dad worked in customs, I guess he bought a PS2 that was destined for East Asia, but somehow ended in his hands. My PlayStation no longer keeps track of time, and that's because the battery has been dead for many years. So I took the battery out of an old toy to use it for my PS2, but to change it you need to open the console. And now that I'm at it, I'm going to clean the fans and board. They must have accumulated an enormous amount of debris over the years. So let's see once and for all what this little machine hides inside. The PS2 is relatively easy to disassemble. It only has 6 screws on the outside, and once removed, the plastic casing easily detaches from the board. The 2 most notable things that we will see as soon as we open the console are the laser and the fan. To remove the fan you need a different screwdriver than for the casing, and a different one to remove the screws from the bottom of the board. And here I was like, freaking Sony, you really made me waste time and money since I had to go to the hardware store several times just to look for the right screwdrivers. To remove the laser you have to pull 4 ribbon cables out. Here goes 1, 2, 3 and 4, which is by the way the one that causes the most problems since it's under the laser. Once the laser is out, you'll want to remove the metal casing, and those screws are removed with another type of screwdriver. From there it's nothing special, just remove this metal thingy and this plastic thing and that's it. This will give us access to the brain of the PlayStation 2, and in my case to the matrix shape that can be seen here like some kind of spider parasitizing the processor. To access the battery, this metal part must be removed, and here I get a big surprise. I found the battery out of place. I have no idea how it fell out. It must have been caused by some hit or something. Another thing I found is that the battery is a Panasonic and not a Sony one. So I'm gonna use the battery that was already there since I guess it probably still has a charge. And I'll save this other one for later. Now that I'm here, I'm gonna clean the mainboard, which was cleaner than I thought. There's some debris here and there, but nothing special. I imagine the fan would be covered in dirt, but in fact it was pretty clean. And one thing I want someone to explain to me why this little wire is cut and it does not connect with the rest of the wires in this plug, but it's soldered directly to the board at the bottom. Maybe that's the reason why the fan makes that strange noise. After giving the metal casing a good cleaning, I cleaned the lens with a cotton swab very slowly and put a little bit of oil on the mechanism that moves the laser. Maybe this way it might work a little better. With everything ready, I put the console back together, but before finishing, let's see if everything is correct. Okay, the console turns on perfectly, so I guess everything is fine. Let's look at the battery and see if it now saves the date. I disconnected the PS2 from the power source and reconnected it again to see if it now saves the date. I just rebooted and it did save the configuration. Now I'm gonna finish cleaning the plastic casing to finish assembling the console. After doing this, I noticed a slight improvement in the loading of video games. But despite the improvement, I do notice that my PS2 sometimes struggles to read games. In GTA Vice City Stories, for example, sometimes the textures of the road take a while to load, and the character looks like it's floating on water. So I thought, wouldn't it be great if there was some other way to run games other than discs? And yes, there's another way. After doing some research, I found this free MacB soft mod that lets you run games off of a flash drive. So I bought a 128GB drive to install free MacB on the memory card. Using a laptop, I gave it a FAT32 format, which was more complicated than I thought since Windows by default does not allow you to format flash drives of such high capacity as FAT32. At the end, I solved this using this program. Then I put all the necessary files onto my flash drive. And finally, I grabbed a blank DVD and burned free MacB on it. Now that free MacB is up and running, one question I had and that no one bothered to answer was whether I could back up my save files before installing free MacB on the memory card. And the answer is yes. Using the built-in Explorer, we simply navigate to the memory card folder, then press the R1 button to bring up the menu. And now all you have to do is copy and paste the folders one by one onto the flash drive. One thing I recommend you do before you install free MacB is don't put any games on the flash drive yet, or do all this process with a low capacity one and save the big one for later. I found out that you can format your flash drive as exFAT thanks to a recent OPL update. So this way you don't have to use programs to split the ISOs into two, since exFAT supports files larger than 4 GB. So this will save you a lot of time because there are many games like God of War 2, Guitar Hero 5 or Midnight Club 3 that easily exceed 8 GB. From there you just have to follow the installation steps and that's it, you have successfully installed FreeMacBoot on your PS2. The PlayStation 2, as you may know, came in 3 versions. The PS2 Fat, the PS2 Slim, and the Super Slim. The Fat one I have here belongs to my cousin who left it at my house many years ago, and unlike mine it doesn't have the Matrix chip. And the bad thing is that it's the 39004 variant, one with the very few models that cannot be soft-modded with FreeMacBoot. My PS2 on the other hand is from the 77000 series, which was released in 2006. And mine in particular is a variant intended for the Asian market because on the back it reads NTSC-J. The latest models were the 90000 series that already had the power supply inside, and unlike most people I like the power supply to be outside. And this way in case it breaks it would only be a matter of buying another one, instead of having to disassemble the entire thing and look over for a compatible power source. And besides, the 70000 series is much easier to mod. Ever since my PlayStation 3 broke half a decade ago, the PlayStation 2 has been my main console for quite a while now. Despite taking it to several repair shops, none of them have been able to fix it, so I might as well just give up on it. Anyway, I'm happy with my PlayStation 2 since I have a huge collection of games that I have either bought or directly burned myself. Here in this box you can see many of the games that I have. I also have a package of blank DVDs to burn, but now that I've installed FreeMacBoot, it'll no longer be necessary. As you can see here, I've already put a bunch of my favorite games onto the flash drive. The first game I will show you guys is the Taka Race Driver 3, which I already mentioned was my first game. Even though it's far from your typical modern Forza or Gran Turismo in terms of graphics, the game still looks pretty good. Maybe this is because I'm a simple guy who would take a fun game over games with crazy looking graphics, but that are more boring than watering a dead flower. With this, I'm not saying I don't like games with good graphics, but if there's no choice, I choose the fun game. And I want to say sorry for the quality of the video. Recording a CRT was honestly much more complicated than I thought. I recorded this video with an iPhone 7 Plus and an LG V40 with menu controls, but I wasn't able to fully replicate what I see on screen. And this TV, by the way, is one of the TVs I used to play when I was a kid. My second game was Spider-Man 3, which I couldn't finish back then because I didn't have any idea what to do. I would just get lost and wander around the city. But that was enough for me. Exploring New York City as a Spider-Man was really fun. One thing I always tried to do was see if I could cross to the other island, but I always fell into the river. I also imagined being able to drive cars and drive around the city, but that wasn't possible either. At that time, I didn't know anything about GTA, and I always fantasized about a game like that. And the Spider-Man 3 was the closest thing I had to whatever I imagined at the time. One of my favorite games is the Dragon Ball Budokai Tenkaichi 3. It wasn't my first Dragon Ball game or even my first Tenkaichi for the PlayStation 2, but this was the one that got me interested in the series. Before this, I honestly didn't care about Dragon Ball. I only bought it because I wanted to play it with my cousin since he loved the series. But now I'm such a huge Dragon Ball fan that I actually have my own channel dedicated to the series. I also took the time to download Budokai Tenkaichi 4, which is one of the best mods that have ever been made for a video game. They added a lot of new characters, with every single one of them having their respective abilities, plus new game modes and campaigns. The work they put into the game is insane. I really do take my hat off to the fans who made this possible. One of the things I didn't like so much about Budokai Tenkaichi 3 was that it was a real danger to your analog sticks when there was a beam struggle. Since you had to spin the joystick so fast, it was really common for people to break their controllers. And that's why the game has that reputation for being a controller wrecker. Luckily, this was not my case. I mean, if there's something I can't be blamed for, it's this, because I really took care of my controllers. The good thing is that they changed the joystick for the triangle button, but it's not perfect since it kind of takes away the skill from the game. As a suggestion, I would implement some kind of quick time event mechanic, so the winner is determined by whoever has the best reflexes, but either way it's an improvement over the analogs. Something I don't like too much is that Cell, my favorite character, no longer differentiates between his perfect form and his super perfect one, since they merged them, and now to transform it requires 5 bars of energy instead of 2. And the worst thing is that no matter how much I press the R3 button, the character just won't absorb the androids. I hope they fix it in the next version because I loved going from its imperfect form to the super perfect one to recover life. In addition, Cell, along with the Androids 19 and 20, although 19 is horrible to use, had one of the most broken abilities, which was lifesteal. You can't imagine how many people got mad at me when spamming that technique. But hey, leaving these tiny details aside, the mod is incredibly well made, and is totally worth playing since the new content it brings is from another world. A game that I liked a lot is the Ninja Turtles. When I was a kid, the graphics were spectacular, and I loved the soundtrack it came with. The funny thing is that I completed the game not too long ago because at the time I didn't have a memory card where to save my progress, and sometimes I would stay up all night trying to see how far I could go, but the game seemed endless and I never finished it. When my dad finally bought me the memory card, the game was very scratched and I couldn't find it anywhere, so I had to burn it on a blank DVD many years later. And the reason I couldn't find it is because the Ninja Turtle games that they sold were always from the trilogy made by Konami, which were also very fun and had a two-player mode, but I would always miss the game made by Ubisoft. But by far my favorite GTA game is the GTA San Andreas. Oh my gosh, the amount of time I must have spent playing this game is not normal. I remember on a seemingly ordinary day, my cousin and I went to the store to buy a new game. There was a particular section I was drawn to. That section had a series of games called Grand Theft Auto. There were numerous GTA games on display. At that moment, I had no idea which one to choose, but I opted for the one labeled San Andreas. Something in me just told me it was the right choice. My cousin and I rushed home and put it on the console. And what happened, as soon as we started the game, we were blown away just by the initial cutscene and the music. When we started playing, this character showed up on screen, with a text prompt asking us to steal a bike. I didn't pay much attention to it and left the alley on foot. I walked a few blocks expecting the typical warning that I was going too far or come across some physical barrier. However, to my surprise, the game let me explore the city without any interruption. Eventually, I found myself stealing a car, which happened to belong to the Ballas gang. I started driving around, crashing into everything in sight. I was so excited to finally find the type of game that I had always wanted to play. After having fun for a while, I remember that when I was right in front of the Vinewood sign, my grandma called me to have dinner, so I had to stop playing for that day. From here, I fell in love with the game, and since I didn't have any way to save my progress, I would explore the map with 4 stars. I remember driving through the desert in the middle of sandstorms with the place behind me on a map that seemed to have no end. One of my favorite vehicles to drive around was the Sand King that you could find under the big gear antenna. Legend has it that the antenna causes paranormal interference on some radio stations, adding that vibe of mystique to the game. I should also mention the firejet chases that I found extremely fun, along with a good selection of music and the many details unique to this version like the color palette and the countryside that feels way more alive than on other versions. And for this and many other reasons, this game is to this day my favorite GTA. And I'm not the only one who thinks this way, since the game has an enormous community support. I remember fondly having bought some non-official GTA games like GTA Rio de Janeiro, Elite Trip, the Vegeta mod, and even the Mr. X mod. But then I'd be surprised to see that it was the GTA San Andreas with different textures or extra features like the hot coffee that I shouldn't have played when I was a kid. But out of all the mods, I highlight GTA 5 for the PlayStation 2, which is really well made and even brings the possibility to switch between the 3 characters of the game. It also brings all the GTA 5 soundtrack to the game, which is honestly quite meh with the exception of this song. As a side note, I have to mention that all the extra textures and other features do come with a price tag as they cause the game to lag when there's a lot going on. But my favorite mod is the Project Kaizen mod from a YouTuber of the same name, which enhances the 2-player mode and removes all the limitations. For example, each player now can drive their own vehicle, or play all the missions of the game with 2 players, which is something I always wanted to do back then but was not possible. The closest thing was to enter the atrium, but pretty much nothing else. If you're thinking of downloading GTA San Andreas for the PlayStation 2, and if you have someone to play it with, I highly recommend that you download the ISO of this mod. And speaking of mods, you have to see the dedication and work that fans all over the world have put into certain games. Like it's the case of Resident Evil Code Veronica, which was fully dubbed into Spanish. The team behind this project really did an amazing job, so much so that it would have no issues passing as an official dub.
Cállate. Un movimiento en falso y dispara.
Resident Evil Code Veronica was the first game of the franchise I played back in 2013, and my second favorite Resident Evil game after Resident Evil 3. The thing I love the most out of this game is the soundtrack, and especially the melody that plays in the safe house. One fun thing about this game is the manual glitch, with which you can get infinite cures or bullets. I didn't know that you could do this until not that long ago, and I wish I had known about it earlier. It would have been very useful for completing the game because, to be honest, I struggled way too much, with this being the most difficult Resident Evil game that I have ever played. Another game that I love and that has also had countless mods is Resident Evil 4, but the most notable one for me is the complete dub that the fans did, and like the previous games, it's so well made that it could easily pass as an official dub.
Ahora vamos a la parte importante. ¿Tienes cigarrillos? Tengo un chicle.
Resident Evil 4 features one of the most addictive combat systems in a video game. You know, walking around, kicking granadas, or decapitating them gives a satisfaction that you can't imagine, especially because of the sound it makes. It's kind of shocking that I played Resident Evil 4 for the first time in 2019, but hey, the game is a gem, and unlike many that prioritize graphics, I take the PS2 version of the game over the GameCube version any day, because of the additional content it brought, such as separate ways that is not available in the GameCube version. I don't know how anyone would miss out on these tremendous additions to see 5% better resolution and textures, but hey, to each their own. A game that still looks spectacular nowadays is God of War 2. However, with this game, I noticed all the limitations of running the game from a flash drive, since the cutscenes lag a lot. It doesn't happen with all the games, but with this one it's very noticeable. When it comes to playing the game, it plays perfect. And if you don't care about the cutscenes, then good for you, but in my case, I prefer to run the game from a disc since thankfully the laser still works for me. One of the games I had the most fun with was The Simpsons Hit and Run, a game that seemed like a kid-friendly version of GTA. The story and gameplay were very entertaining, and my favorite levels were the last ones where everything had a Halloween theme, from flying brooms and creepy mascots to aliens as the final boss. And finally, to top it off, we have the SNES Emulator. Imagine being able to emulate the most successful console of the competition at the time on a PlayStation 2. Nintendo must have lost their minds when they saw this. The amount of games available is immense, to the point that it kind of annoys me to have to navigate through so many games to play the ones that I want. When it comes to performance, I honestly have to say it's mediocre at best. There are playable games like Total Gear 2, but others like Super Mario World 2 freeze as soon as you open the game. Other ones open, but not only do they have slowdowns, but also have very high input lag. King of Dragons, which is my favorite game from the console, is unplayable, and I don't think it's a lack of power thing, but rather it comes down to optimization. I heard about an emulator called SNES Tickle, but I didn't even bother with it. Anyway, if this video has enough support, I might do a video covering emulators. Unfortunately, it's impossible to showcase the enormous amount of great games the PlayStation 2 has without the video going infinite, and that in itself speaks very well of the console. Along the way, I've left out games like Burnout 3, Silent Hill, Guitar Hero, Black, Need for Speed Most Wanted, Midnight Club 3, Matrix, and many others. The PlayStation 2, despite being over 20 years old, I think it's still worth it if you're interested in playing games from that era, and you can get a fully functional PS2 for around $20. But keep in mind they look like they just came out of my grandpa's dumpster. For me, the PS2 and PS3 era was my favorite, because on one hand you have games that look good enough and that wouldn't destroy the company if the game didn't perform well. Now games have an extremely long development time, in addition to being extremely expensive, which pose a huge risk for developers who would rather play it safe and stick to what works. This prevents us from having innovative games that dare to bring new and fun mechanics like in those days. I think this is one of the reasons why gaming is in decline, and also why the Switch is so successful, because it doesn't follow the logic of the other consoles that seek to see how far they can push realism, which, mind you, is not bad, but The problem is that along the way they often leave the fun aspect aside, to the point where I prefer to get out of my house and ride a bike or go climbing, which offer a more realistic experience than seeing pixels on a screen imitating reality.